Hi, and I'm Dr. David Perl, and welcome to this video series on healing from limerence. It's difficult to know which videos to put first because they're all so important in my judgment. And this one on the drama triangle is no different. I first came across the drama triangle in some feedback that I received from one of my tutors when I was training to be a psychotherapist. I had touched upon limerence in my end-of-year essay, a personal reflection of what I had learnt in that year during my training as a psychotherapist and counsellor. And ironically, the person who marked my essay was the tutor who was in a group where I disclosed, well, one of my disclosures to my limerent object was in a group that he was facilitating. And he talked about the drama triangle in my feedback, where he asked me to think and reflect upon the interrelationship between myself, my wife, and the limerent object, this triangular relationship. And at first, I was angry and dismissed it and thought, what does he know? He knows nothing about limerence. But the more work I've done, the more I see the drama triangle playing out, not just in that relationship, but with all the clients that we work in, especially those that are having affairs, where there's this triangulation going on between the betrayed, the betrayer, and the affair partner. And the more I look around, the more I see the drama triangle playing out everywhere. So what is it? Well, it's an interrelationship between three core elements of what we call the victim, who's always at the bottom, the persecutor, and the rescuer. And we're going to look at each of these three elements in a bit more detail. The persecutor's mantra is, it's all your fault. The rescuer's mantra is, oh, poor you, let me come and help you. And the victim is, it's not fair, I can't do this, poor me. And as I said, every dysfunctional relationship takes place on the drama triangle. And the reality is most relationships are pretty dysfunctional. This is why it's so common. We do it internally, we do it in relationship with others, and it plays out at a global levels between countries, between organizations, between businesses. And we all generally have a primary role, one role that we will have more affinity with than the others. But if we play one role, we have to at times play the others as well. We can't just play one on its own. And as we said, it's a relationship about power and control, because so much of human interdynamics is about power and control, a need to try and take power or control over others, because we go back to those infantile needs where we were so powerless. So much of this again comes from early life. And this is where we learn the drama triangle. We start playing it out at a very young age. You look at like young children and how they start having temper tantrums, trying to manipulate, and this is how they learn to get their needs met at an early age. So it's all about position. The rescuer and persecutor at the top, they feel superior to the victim who's always at the bottom. And then what eventually happens is the victim feels put upon, and then they'll suddenly flip and they'll switch to the position of the persecutor, and everybody flips around. So it's all about a need to try and take power at the top of this drama triangle. So let's look a bit about the rescuer, because again, limerence, I think, has a core element of trying to rescue the limerent object. So let's look at the rescuer. So the rescuer sees themselves as a helper, a fixer, or a caretaker. And the caring professions are full of people unconsciously trying to rescue everybody else. Doctors, nurses, teachers, therapists, coaches, they're all running around trying to rescue. It's what Jung called the wounded healer. And it can be a dangerous position to be in if we're not aware that's what we're doing or why we're doing it. Rescuers don't see themselves as victims, but they're still on this drama, or the other name for it is the victim triangle. It's still a position of victimhood. And why do people rescue? Well, it's a great way of saving everybody else without having to look at ourselves, without having to hold that mirror up and taking a deep, harsh, honest look at ourselves as to who we are, why do we do what we do, why do we feel what we do. Why do we think what we do? It's a great way of diverting away from that difficult task of looking inwards. Rescue is a classic codependence. And codependency is so tightly bound with limerence that I will be doing a separate video on codependency. It's a huge topic and one that I can only scratch the surface of. But again, the rescuer position is the classic codependent. Or the other word for codependency is love addiction. What we see with rescuers were that their needs were not met growing up. Their needs were secondary to their parents' needs. In the work that I do, I often see that a rescuer comes from a family where the parents have divorced, where there was obviously marital strife between the parents, and perhaps the parents playing victim and persecutor, and the child learning to be the rescuer, to try and fix the broken marriage. I hear that so often. The thing with rescuers is they need a victim to rescue. And we live in a world where there's plenty of people willing to play the victim, wanting to be rescued. Well, they say they want to be rescued, but they don't really, and we'll come to that. And at the core of the rescuer, their greatest fear is abandonment. So what they do is they do anything to try and manipulate the environment so that people don't reject them or abandon them. With men, we call it nice guy syndrome. And there's a wonderful book by Dr. Robin Glover called No More Mr. Nice Guy that I recommend to all the men that I coach. What about persecutors? Let's look at them. Well, they identify themselves as victims. And the persecutor blames everybody else for when things go wrong. But they're in complete denial about how they blame. They don't see it. And if you challenge the persecutor, they just become more offensive. They'll attack even more. And what we often see with the persecutor is they themselves were bullied in childhood. And again, with my own personal experience, my mother was a bully. She was a rageaholic and would lash out at me. And I gravitate to the position of the persecutor more than perhaps the other two positions, although not so much now because of the work that I've done, but certainly growing up, I was a bully as well. Bullies are often bullied by parents. And what happens is that when a child is bullied, they build up this internalized rage. We call it shame-based rage, because they're shamed for being angry in their childhood. They're not allowed to have their feelings. They feel bad for being angry. And what happens is it gets turned inwards. It's internalized. And that suppressed and repressed anger then turns into, as they grow up, being very controlling, authoritarian, judging, disapproving, preaching, threatening. All those sorts of behaviors. And again, they're all defenses for that person to stop and look at themselves. And again, the persecutor needs a victim to blame. Plenty of people out there willing to play the victim. And then let's look at the position of the victim. The victim feels like they can't do it themselves. I'm broken, I'm unfixable, nothing's going to help. And when you do offer advice to somebody who plays the victim, they play what's called the yes but game. There's always some reason why they can't do it. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough help. I don't have enough money. There's always some reason why they can't do it. And if you give another possibility as to how they might navigate around that, there'll be some other obstacle. So this is what I said before. The victim doesn't really want to be helped. They're getting it's what we call in psychology a secondary gain. They get some benefit from staying in the position of the victim. It serves their need. It gives them supply. It gives them attention, validation. The other thing with people that play the victim is that they often have a good story. And sometimes that story becomes very difficult to challenge. And I know with my own father, he has the ultimate victim story. He survived the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz and Dachau, lost his entire family. And when I've challenged my father about how he uses his victimhood to manipulate others, he said, well, I have every right to. I am a victim. And it's very hard to pierce that veneer to get him to see how he manipulates others by using his story. So as I said before, most people will identify with one or perhaps two positions, very rarely the third position. It's where we enter the triangle, and it's a mechanism that we learn is to survive in childhood, growing up in a family that was not functional. The core belief for the rescuer is my needs are not important. I'm only here to serve others. And again, that's a position that I'm very familiar with. I became a doctor, then a psychotherapist, set up a trauma crisis management company. That's all about rescuing. Why was that? Because when I grew up, my needs were not important. I was there just to serve others. I was named after my father's murdered brothers. I was there just to replace family that he had lost. Or that was one of the reasons why I was born. The persecutor grows up believing the world is dangerous and I'm going to get them before they get me. That's a position I'm very familiar with, because for me, growing up, the world was really dangerous. With what happened to my father, I knew, even though it wasn't talked about, but I knew at some level the world was not safe. Don't trust anybody. Keep your head below the parapet. Play small, play safe. That's why doing this work for me is a real challenge, just talking and putting myself out there, because it's going against that core belief that I took on, that mindset that we talked about in the previous video about beliefs, mindset, self-awareness. I'm going against that powerful mindset of play small. Don't talk about this stuff. It will get you shot. It will get you killed. And then the victim's belief growing up in their family is I can't do this for myself. I need help. I'm helpless. You're the only one who can help me. We also do this internally. It's an internal process. So let's say that we're trying to lose weight. Let's say that we eat a bag of donuts when we're on diet, and we first off, we persecute ourselves. We say, oh, you stupid person, you've got no self-control. So that's the position of the persecutor. We then feel bad. We start feeling all those feelings of self-loathing and lack of self-control. That's the position of the victim. And then we might rescue ourselves. Some people don't get to that point. They just stay stuck in the position of the self-loathing and beating themselves up, the inner persecutor. But some people might get to the third position and then rescue themselves by saying, oh, well, it was only 10,000 calories. I'll go on a run, or I'll eat less next week. I'll make it up. And that's the rescuer position. So it's an internal process that we do as well. And again, at the core of this is shame. We feel shame. We don't feel good enough. Now, most articles you'll read don't talk about the healthy positions of the drama triangle. They'll just say that, well, you've got to stop it. You've got to step off the triangle. And that's what you do have to do. When you notice that you're being caught by the drama triangle, you have to exit it. You have to say to your partner, I'm not playing this game. I need some time out. Just step off it and remove yourself from the situation. Go and reflect. But what are the conscious positions? Well, the persecutor finds their power, the victim finds their humility, and the rescuer finds their humanity. So the persecutor finds their power. They learn to take control of themselves. They realize they don't have to oppress others to feel better about themselves. So it's an inner state of being as opposed to an external oppression of others. They take responsibility. They recognize their anger, which fuels their persecutory position. And they work on that anger, that rage. That's part of their grief. The rescuer finds their humanity. So they help, they don't rescue. And a key difference between rescuing and helping is that rescuers just give their advice without it being sought. And there's a difference between when somebody asks for help, you giving them support, that's not rescuing. So they help others. But the other thing is they're not looking for reciprocation. They're not looking for love or validation or having their own unmet needs met through that relationship. They encourage the other person to take responsibility. They empower the other person rather than try and keep them hooked into this codependent relationship of neediness. They empower the other person to go off and manage this themselves. So they don't foster dependency, and they really believe in the other, that the other has the ability to get this done. And what about the victim? Well, they become humble. They find their humility. They stop blaming everybody else. They take personal responsibility, and they change. They take action. But the only way they're going to take action and change is by connecting to their own anger, which has been suppressed. And in therapy, we often say that depression is anger turned inwards. And we see this so often. We see it with so many people. I mean, we live in a world, I think that the number one prescribed drug now is antidepressants. And that is in part because we live in a culture where we're not allowed to be angry, because we don't even know how to own our anger, how not to project it onto others in a destructive way and oppressing others, just to own it and take responsibility for our own anger. Nobody teaches us how to do that. And victims also learn to live with ambiguity and to accept change. And I think all three positions are about letting go of control. As I said, they're positions of about power and control. So how do we get off the drama triangle? Well, as I said, you can't just step off it. You have to spot it to see it for what it is. And then when you see it, you don't engage. You say to the other person that I need time out if you're getting triggered. I'm on the drama triangle. Recognize that you've gone to that position of the persecutor, the rescuer, or the victim. And however much work we do, we can still get caught out at times on the drama triangle. This stuff is so deeply embedded in us, especially if we grew up in a dysfunctional family, that this stuff is hard to overcome. But we can learn to be more self-aware. How do we learn to be more self-aware? Well, I talk about growing about self-awareness in the next presentation.